So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on the location you are residing. A very warm welcome to each one of you. This is the fourth webinar in our knowledge sharing series. We are really thankful to each one of you for the continued support and overwhelming response. So today we chose to have role of data governance and risk and compliance as one of the key areas for discussion and understanding. So if you recall, we started this journey with sessions on Basel, especially the standardized approach of Basel III. Then we had a session on compliance as well, the previous session. So all these risk and compliance solutions require a strong data foundation, which in turn needs data governance principles to be adopted. So keeping this in mind, I'm very happy to introduce my fellow speakers. We have Mr. Kannan, who comes with over 4 decades of industry experience, former chairman and managing director of one of the leading government-owned banks in India. And he's currently on the boards of several leading companies, and he's also an advisor in the risk management area. So for this very important topic on data governance, we have a speaker from US, Mr. Jay Panchal. He's a senior technology professional, comes with huge amount of experience and expertise in designing, developing, and supporting enterprise solutions. And we are fortunate to have him for this session. And I'm sure each one of you would be thoroughly gaining good amount of knowledge as part of this session today. Next slide, please. So what we have done is we have drawn up this agenda just to give a quick overview of data governance and its importance, then move towards the principles, the overall framework and the focus areas, few implementation references, and how to measure success, followed by usual Q&A. So in the course of session, if you have any questions, please feel free to post it on the chat box, chat window. We will pick it up and answer the same during the Q&A session. So we strongly believe any financial institution or a bank should manage the risk and compliance journey efficiently. And by doing so, it creates a lot of opportunities, and the opportunities creates value, and the value creates stakeholders' wealth. So next slide, please. So what are the key measures of success when it comes to data governance? So we all know that today, data is one of the very important areas for banks. And not only banks, even some of the countries and governments have come up with huge set of laws and regulations for data privacy, ensuring the data stays within its borders. And it is not a big surprise to see some of the large institutions having chief data officer on par with chief risk officer or chief compliance officer. So that is the amount of importance today financial institutions are giving for data and data governance. So it is very interesting and important to understand what are the key aspects behind this data governance, how to go about. We all know that, the golden rule is comply or perish. So we need to comply. So we need to comply with host of regulations, whether it is from the central bank or other government bodies. And these institutions have set certain compliance standards that needs to be adhered to. And we have to ensure, especially in the days where we suddenly see a whole lot of news reports on data breach, we need to strengthen our security mechanism. We need to build proper standards. And very importantly, we need to ensure good quality data is stored for future consumption as well. So with these few words, let me hand over to my other panelist, Mr. Kannan. Over to you, Mr. Kannan.
Thank you, Mr. Suresha. Greetings to all my banker friends from across the globe. Yes, we have an information explosion. And today, banks and financial institutions, on the one hand, have huge, strong data, but stored in unconnected systems. And on the other hand, continue collecting useless data also. Yes, friends, data governance is a complex topic. In order to fully understand what it means and how to practice good data governance, we have chosen this topic for you, covering broadly the following points: data governance and its importance, benefits of data governance, overseeing the data governance in an organization, the framework, and what are the best practices. Now, data governance refers to the practices and processes that helps bank and financial institutions manage and protect data. Banks, like most businesses today, face significant data overload. Not only do banks need to process more data, they need to understand the value of using data to drive innovation and modernize their operations and services. Without technology to filter, store, and protect data, banks and financial institutions can't differentiate between sensitive data and those needed to run accurate client reports. Unfortunately, most banks today still have manual approaches to data governance, which cannot keep up with the pace of modern business. Apart from this challenge, regulators are also placing even more pressure on the banks and financial institutions to get it under control. Penalties for data violations are very stiff. Accurate, high quality data allows you to make better business decisions. However, the key to getting that high quality data is the first instance is having the structure in place that enables you to onboard, store, and communicate the information easily, which precisely is what is data governance framework. To take us through this journey, we have today with us Jay Panchal, senior tech professional based in US. He has expertise in designing, developing, and supporting enterprise solutions. I am confident that all of you will enjoy his presentation and definitely find it useful for your organization. Over to you, Mr. Jai.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kannan, for beautifully. And thank you all on behalf of both GMR and BPPL. We understand your time is valuable and we strive to make that productive for you. So before we talk about data governance, I think it's important for us to ground ourselves with what do we mean by governance and what's its applicability. So broadly speaking, governance is applicable to pretty much any human endeavor, which is kind of set towards specific goals or objective, which can be benefited by adding structure to it, right? Now, the wide applicability can be shown as follows, right? So a mom and pop donut shop, right? They also need data, they also need governance, right? They need governance on the aspects of inventory management, hiring, and even how to greet customers. Governance also applies to nation states, right? On how to run the country. And that's when we talk in the language of laws, taxation, constitution. And we all know, unfortunately, what happens when Either governance is non-existent, is inefficient, or even misaligned to the best interest of the stakeholders. In the case of nation state, we're talking about the citizens, right? Now, let's define data governance, right? And my objective here is that by the end of this presentation, I want to highlight why data governance is at the heart of global companies' business strategy, right? Why is it so closely tied to being compliant? So, I like this definition from the Data Governance Institute, and I'll just read it out for you. So data governance is a system of decision rights and accountabilities for information-related processes executed according to agreed upon models which describe who can take what actions with that information and when, and under what circumstances, using what methods. So if you think about this carefully, it talks about processes, right? The processes, it talks about people who are responsible to take what decisions. It also talks about under what circumstances, right? So this captures what, how, who, when, and how, all of it. And again, as you will see, that without a robust data governance practices in any organization, especially in 2021, compliance can be very difficult to achieve. Next slide, please. So now let's look at how do we build that strong foundation for successful implementation of data foundation. And let's start with those key principles, right? How do you ground your thinking when you are talking about data governance? So the very first thing I would say is your company, your organization may require that mindset shift, right? So we need to move away from my data to our data. Data is an enterprise asset. You may be the custodian of it, you may be the steward of it, or you may be even titled as an owner of that data. But the data is a shared asset. We need to make sure that we develop that culture within that organization. The next thing that's critically important is the accountability, right? So in any implementation, data must go from hop 1 to hop 2 to hop n, right? It has to be cleansed, it has to be transformed, it has to be conformed. And throughout the journey, data cannot be left alone. And what I mean by that is it must have the stewardship assigned to it. It must have maybe a consumer assigned to it. It must have owner assigned to it. All of those roles must be assigned in advance, and those assignees will have to be accountable, right, for maintaining the security, cleanliness, high quality of that data. This is again, we're talking about broad principles, and then as we move forward, we will see how these principles manifest into how do we build that data governance on ground. The next one is compliance. So I know a lot of people's ears perked up when we talk about compliance. We all are bankers interested in getting compliant. So again, when you are building these frameworks that will eventually get the governance to the level that we all want, we must follow both internal and external rules and regulations. Now, what does that mean? Now, the idea here is that we want to avoid as much as we can the approach of, well, let's go ahead and first build that system, and then we'll go back and inspect if it passes all the checks that our regulators or auditors, our risk officers want to pass, right? That is not a preferred approach. The preferred approach is we want to build those processes that have those compliance requirements those audit requirements baked into them. And when that happens, achieving data governance or even achieving compliance becomes much easier. It just becomes a regular day for you, right? Because those requirements are already baked into your processes. The next one, I think this is very easy for all of us to know. We must have ran into data quality issues over and over again and try to find that root cause, right? Data quality, we must have robust and consistent data quality management across enterprise. And just to kind of drive that point home, the decision, if you think about it, decisions made based on bad data leads to undesirable outcomes, right? Garbage in, garbage out. We all know data quality is of critical importance, right? And the last principle, right, is understanding what we could have done better, right? Now, how do you build that framework, right? We first need to build auditable trail, right? All the decisions, the processes, and controls subject to data governance, they must be auditable and tied to a particular outcome. Now, it sounds good, but I think that this is a very powerful statement here, and I hope to demonstrate that, right? So now, if you look at a particular implementation and see, okay, well, this is how we went about it. This is how we built our architecture. These are the tools that we use. And then you look at the outcome at the end of the project, you reflect back. And if the outcome is closer to what the desirable outcome would have been, then of course you would want to encourage those practices, right? And if the outcome was not something that you really wanted to get to, then of course you want to discourage those practices. And if you think about it, how this plays out is over time, your organization becomes more productive, more efficient, and the success rate of your implementations will go higher. So you are building a system that will self-improve and get better over time, right? This is all the hype about artificial intelligence, right? So it learns from its mistake and it gets better. And that's something that we want to embed in our organizations as well. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about the dream house, right? A dream house of data governance. And I want you all to wear your architect hats for a little bit. Now, what is the foundation of that dream house, right? And I think we all know it's your data, right? Without you understanding the importance of, as Mr. Kannan alluded earlier, the importance and criticality of retaining, capturing, securing, and provisioning your data, things will become lost causes for you, right? And again, the industry is moving so quickly where we are coming up on a month-to-month basis, new ways to monetize the data, right? Funny thing, Mr. Kannan, tossed the word saying, useless data. Well, apparently, a lot of the, technology officers would call that a misnomer, right? Because data is really, we just don't know the ways the data can be useful, right? So the approach, especially in last decade or so, is we retain the data as much as we can, and we'll think about how to monetize it, how to make use of it later down the road, right? When we become wiser. And that's why you see all the hype about big data. The big data allows you to, capture the data without knowing what its potential uses in the future. But it's there when you understand how to make more sense of it, right? So data is critically important. Now let's talk about this 8 different pillars, right? Well, data architecture, analysis, and design, right? The processes of building blueprint, your execution strategies, you know, once the implementation has been done, what does that operating model look like? You know, what are those different support structures? All of that has to be thought about, well documented and well communicated to all the stakeholders, right? Your delivery teams, your programmers, the sponsors, the project managers, all of them. They have to agree on how about, how to go about this journey, right? Also, there has to be the right approval processes, right? So, you know, especially in larger banks, larger organizations, you have so many different architecture groups, you know, so many different lines of businesses. They are all building their own systems. However, unless there are architecture artifacts, principles in place, we are not going to build a house that we want, right? Everybody does what they think is convenient at the time, and that's no way to be successful. The second thing, I think we talked about it a little bit, data quality, right? Bad data leads to bad outcomes. On ground, what can you do, right, to enhance your data quality management? Well, you need to explore, you know, what's available out there in terms of data quality management framework. You know, what are those integration capabilities for a given framework? And based on your technology stack, you want to choose that data quality management framework, which provides the level of flexibility, integration, and support, right? You also want, when you are looking for data quality framework, you also want to see if it allows you to do trend analysis, right? So if you are watching month over month a particular data segment of data that really doesn't provide that high quality, you should be able to track down and then track down quickly and go back to the root cause and address it, right? And then one more thing, you know, we also want to find data issues or the bad data before they actually manifest, right? How do you do that? You build those technical data quality checks, the business data quality checks, and put that trend analysis together, and that'll give you a good probabilistic model to know what's coming next, right? In terms of the quality of your data. The next pillar is master and reference data, right? So reference data is essentially your static identifiers, right? The things like product codes, the currencies, ticker symbols, all of these. And what reference data does, it allows you to quickly identify and filter out bad data, right? When you come to the business intelligence side of things, reference data will allow you to create those multidimensional reports, right? It'll allow you to create, allow you to slice and dice your reports in many different ways, right? And this is all the this is what your business or your leadership wants to see, right? Different perspectives on your profitability, on your risk management, how far along you are in your compliance journey. So reference data is critical. The next is master data, right? So master data is also kind of similar to reference data. However, master data will have list of critical business entities that your organization has agreed to share with each other. So a product code ABC will be recognized in line of business A and also will be recognized in line of business X, right? Everybody knows what product code ABC means. That's your master data. Again, this is critically important to maintain a master data repository, right? And we'll come back to this and talk about some of the practical ways on, building that MDM platform. The fourth pillar is data security, right? So we've all seen big banks, social media companies, utility companies struggle with keeping their data safe and secure, right? The consequences of a security breach is devastating, not only for companies, they may end up getting fined millions, sometimes billions of dollars. The consequences are also devastating for all the customers, right? With the identity theft, fraud, etc. We all know, right? So how critical is data security? So I think we'll probably, with this audience, I may not need to go in that detail. Of course, we'll come back and talk about some of the considerations on how do we enhance data security practices under the umbrella of data governance. The next pillar is data storage and operations, right? So here, this is all kind of, making your operations more efficient, adding more visibility, and adding more accountability once you go to production, right? Some of the good or some of the best practices that I've noticed throughout the years is it's always a good idea to centralize some of the common capabilities, right? And enable that metadata management, enable that factory model, right? Now, let me give you a quick example on some of those things. So, well, you have different lines of businesses. They exchange data with each other. And at the end, it kind of becomes a mishmash of, who owns what, who is responsible to do what, is there a single source of truth anywhere, right? However, if you had a common metadata management framework, right, what you're doing is before you bring any new data segment into your system, you ask them, give me the data dictionary with it, give me the data profiling information with it, and then I'll feed that into a data cataloging tool, right? And a data catalog, briefly, is a nice interface, a nice user interface where you can search, right? You can search end of period balance, and it'll bring up, well, this is where this particular field originated from. These are all the different hops that it has been through. And if you are interested in consuming this, right, you may need to reach out to this particular group in your organization, right? So this adds a lot of convenience, make things efficient, and throughout the journey, who is the data steward, who is the owner, and who's the right consumer, right? Another critical thing about storing data is to make sure that your storage systems support high availability. It has disaster recovery and disaster preparedness in place, and it also is scalable and flexible in terms of how does it integrate, right? Back in the days, maybe a few years back, we could not support the operational systems, right? Systems which need sub-second responses, right? So things like credit card processing versus your analytical applications where it's okay to process that data the next day, right? Those two different requirements will require two different ways of storing the data. However, with advances in technologies, that can be done from one system alone, right? And this kind of reduces the cost, not only the first time, but it reduces the cost on an ongoing basis, right? Because you're not managing, multitude of different systems. You don't have, folks who are supporting those systems. I'll move to the next pillar, which is metadata manager. Now, this is kind of the easiest one to connect to how does it help us to become compliant, right? So we must all have heard that regulators want to look at a particular line item in a particular report, and they need the ability to just expand, and go all the way back to that transaction level detail or even the account level detail, right? Now think about what you need in order to get there, right? You need to maintain where your data has been originated, which hops it has been through, has there been any transformations applied, any translation done. So you need a complete traceability. And without metadata, it's just a pipe dream. Will not happen, right? So this is why you need clearly, right? Without a robust metadata management, there is no traceability for you. So again, we'll talk about what are some of the good practices in terms of building that metadata management framework. And if you want to achieve that drill down capability, right? I'll move on to, yes, the seventh pillar, right? Again, so document and content management, right? This is, we all are familiar, we would be lost without our SharePoint sites and our wiki pages, right? This is where you would keep all your design decisions, all the, critical contracts, third-party agreements, licenses, and a lot of other stuff, right? So we definitely need that pillar. And the last one is data warehousing and business intelligence, right? So this is where you make use of that data, right? Produce business intelligence out of it. Things like calculating your profitability, generating management reporting, FP&A, and a lot of other stuff, right? This subject will require whole another webinar in and of itself, but I think it's critical to kind of stand up that pod, that pillar, in order to successfully build that data governance. Now let's talk about how these 8 pillars will manifest in the actual implementation, right? So as I talked about, as I touched upon before, the right thing to do here is to build dedicated work streams or small pods whose primary responsibility is to stand up and maintain these pillars, right? And why do I have to stress on this? Is many times when you look at the business requirements, or when you look at what the regulators are asking for, right? You're working your way back, and then you think about, oh, what is the way for me to apply that traceability? And then after maybe 3 months of doing some looking around, you might come back and say, oh, well, I should have kept that metadata, right? Instead of going that route, we want to start as soon as we can, right? So these activities cannot be an afterthought. They have to begin from the get-go. And then again, all the 3 horizontals that you see, they are the enablers, right? It ensures data stewardship, ensures every step of the way who is the data steward, and there cannot be any gap in the accountability, right? Make sure that you invest in the right technology stack, tools, and practices. And then, of course, the policies and best practices are not only built, but they are also communicated and documented with all stakeholders. And we do all of that, and now you have your dream house we talked about earlier. Next slide, please. Now, this is the more detailed view of what we just talked about, right? And I may not go through all of it, but it's critical to maybe look at a couple of them, right? So what we're looking at here is, if you are building an MDM solution or a reference data repository, what is the scope of that endeavor, right? If you are building that pod, well, when you talk about data integration architecture, right, that has to be part of your master and reference data strategy. When you look at the reference data management system, of course, that's within scope of it. How do we integrate customer data, right? When there is a new acquisition or a sellout of a line of business, how do we separate that component out of our existing systems, as well? How do we incorporate new systems within our ecosystem, right? The product data integration, dimension management, right? We talked about that reference data, providing you that ability to slice and dice your reporting, right? Let's look at the data security management, right? Again, we all need to be singing the same song from the organization. We have to have those data privacy standards well defined and applied in every walk of your day. The confidentiality of confidentiality classification. So this is where we tag different data elements, right? Whether it classifies as personally identifiable information, right? Whether, different privacy rules like GDPR, HIPAA, CCPA here in California, right? In order for us to be compliant to those regulations, we need to classify our data on that confidentiality scale, right? The password practices. Well, do we enable single sign-on? Nady group, all of those things. So again, we are talking about the scope of that particular part, right? So these activities will be part of your data security management consideration. Yeah, we can move on to the next one. So before we do that, my apologies. So the distinction here is that these focus areas are tangible, right? This is where you would build the teams around. These different focus areas will have a set of well-defined deliverables to it, right? The next slide that we look at, it's more about how do you rally people around within your organization, right? So these are the organizational focus area. Now imagine a scenario where a particular bank has been missing the goals for the past few years. And what they do is they might reach out to McKinsey or PwC or other external help. And they'll invite them to come and look at their organizational structure, their incentive structure, and then give a set of recommendations, right? Well, if you are going through that journey, this might help you, right? So again, as we said before, data governance will be at the heart of your compliance journey. And with that in mind, you may want to recognize that we need to change our organizational culture, right? What are the critical success factors, right? Is it just the bottom line after every quarterly report? Maybe not, right? What are the reporting structures? How tall a hierarchy you need to build in order to have the right accountability at different levels, right? Management matrix. How do we add visibility? How do we constantly monitor, define those KPIs, and find out how do we continue to move forward in that efficient manner? Again, very, it doesn't look like it belongs here, but your team's attitudes, style of working, preferences, openness to work, all of those things have to be considered, talked about, and well defined, right? Again, this is for your reference. Please feel free to go through, and if you have questions, we will definitely follow up and provide more information around the organizational focus areas as well. We can move on to next slide as well. So this is where I would ask a little bit of participation from you, right? And the reason is we talked about those 8 different focus areas before, right? And this particular perspective is any implementation, right? Maybe your bank offering a new consumer credit card, right? And you launch that product. This is how that journey would look like. But what I want you to do in your mind is, as I talk about this each individual work package, I want you to kind of connect back to those foundational principles that we talked about before, right? So, well, first of all, you start with defining your business problem, right? Well, we have new set of data coming in. We don't know what schema to put them in. We don't know if the data is reliable, right? All of that will be part of your business definition. Well, then you go back to the executives, folks who will sign the checks for you, and then you obtain the sponsorship, right? Then you do the maturity assessment. You build your roadmap. You see where in this journey you are and where you need to be. Then you move on and build those high-level architecture, right? You start with conceptual level 1, and then you kind of break it apart and provide that detailed, granular information that your delivery team will need. Then you want to go ahead and establish the organizational blueprint, right? Understand your data, build those data dictionaries. We talk about metadata management and define those key performance indicators. And the third row that you see, these are all parallel activities. So once you have done what we just touched upon, all the rest can be kicked off in parallel, right? You would identify data stewards, create center of excellence, build your master and reference data repository, data quality, so on and so forth. And throughout this journey, you would want to define those KPIs, measure those, and then go back and see what we could have done better, right? Now, if you think through this in a little deeper manner, you will realize that there is no clear distinction here, right? Many of these work packages will require all three to work in tandem. All three being, people, process, and technology, right? And that is why data governance. There is no data governance tool in the market, right? That will fix all of your problems. It cannot be addressed by technology alone. It cannot be addressed by the smartest people alone, right? Or it cannot be addressed by just tweaking your processes here and there. You need all three: people, process, and technology, right? Next slide, please. So I think we have maybe another couple of minutes, and maybe we should open for Q&A. But I want to leave all of you with some of the practical recommendations, right? These are some of the very low-hanging fruits, right? If you didn't hear the rest of this webinar, and if you just had a short 2-minute pitch that I wanted to give you, this is what I would recommend. You need to invest in strong data foundation. What it's going to do, it's going to allow you to build that centralized single source of truth, right? Once you have that, all of the processes, all of these peripheral processes, which are very critical, can be done in a very efficient and quick manner, right? The next is, build strong policy and processes. Again, this is the work that need to happen with the business, with the executives, the architects, build those processes and policies. The next is identify data stewards. So this is, again, they don't have to be a particular individual or set of individuals. It could be the groups, teams, etc. And the last but not the least is enable that factory model, right? So once you have that centralized data foundation, you can actually build services that can be applied to many different projects, many different systems, right? You build once and use often. That's kind of the key takeaways here. I think I'll skip remaining slides here. They are good for your reference. And of course, if you share this, if you have any questions, please come back and we'll be happy to answer some of those questions. Again, thank you for your time, and we're open for questions.
Next slide, please. Yeah. So before our Q&A, let me, share few interesting concluding remarks. I can't resist but to bring in the very first thing. We all know and use PPT, right? We are saying PPT. You mentioned PPT on a different note: people, processes, and technology. which are the key to a strong data foundation. It's a great way to remember and implement in our daily life in our banking organization. Couple of other very interesting messages you mentioned are bad data leads to bad outcomes. So it goes without saying, every bank, everyone in this call would take away this very important message. It is interesting that 8 pillar, factors which you explained, which are very relevant to every organization in its journey. Centralizing capabilities is another very powerful journey. Would like to add, to build a strong data-driven decision-making process is one of the key aspects for any financial institution. We don't need a regulator to tell us that build these things. It is required for our very own survival. So banks need to strengthen their data management policies and process, and it is the foundation for very survival of the bank. So you have to have good technology tools which can be sourced so that you can build a good quality data, store it, and you are able to address today when the regulators visit, especially in the risk and compliance area, when the regulators visit, one of the questions you face is on the data lineage front. It is good if you have a strong data governance processes and principles in place, you are able to address this with ease. Next slide, please. So with this, I would like to thank you once again for gracing this occasion. On behalf of JMR and BPPL, I thank each one of you for making this program a grand success. We are delighted to host this webinar and will assist you by bringing global best practices at every step so that your risk and compliance journey is very interesting and successful. So today we completed our 4th session in our series, which we have planned to run for the next 6 months. Interestingly, our next session, we thought, when it comes to Basel and risk management framework, we know there are 3 key areas: credit risk, market risk, and operational risk. So we intend to focus on operational risk management framework from one of our experts, and it would be scheduled for Thursday, September 9th. We would be sharing the invite and other details. So now we would like to move towards Q&A. Thanks once again. To start with, there are some questions in the chat window. Would you like to look at it, Jay?
Yes, so the one that I'm just going through right now is a question from, apologies if I'm not saying the name right, Anna. Question is, how do you successfully integrate data governance strategy in a migration strategy? Is there even a link between the two? I would argue that there is a strong link between the two, right? If you think about the commonalities between, when you are standing at the get-go of a data governance strategy or kicking off that project versus when you are doing a migration, right? The same principles will apply in both places, right? There'll be some minor differences when you are doing a migration. Again, look back, how does this particular integration pattern needs to be modified or changed, or versus if you're setting something new, right? However, my recommendation would be, again, to go back, keep those 5 principles in mind, and they will be equally applicable, whether it's a migration strategy or even a data governance strategy. All right, I hope that answers the question. I'll move on to the next. This is from Yemi. The question reads, kindly throw more light on the role of data stewards in data governance. Great question, right? So data stewardship will have very precise roles and authorities assigned to it, right? So let's take a chunk of data, your master and reference data, right? If I'm being assigned as a data steward, right, or a particular organization, a group is being assigned as data stewards for master and reference data, these are my activities. These are my accountabilities. First of all, I am responsible for keeping the data for high quality. I am also responsible for anybody who's sending me master reference data for enrichment. I'm responsible to make sure that they are sending me not just the data, but all the corresponding metadata, right? I'm also responsible that this data does not get into the wrong hands, right? So I'll be the sole responsible person who will authorize the access to that data. And again, I won't be doing it on a whim, right? There'll be policies, principles, and a checklist that'll be in front of me that'll tell me whether this particular group really needs that data or this can kind of push back against, right? So again, data stewardship is a kind of, it has the larger bucket of responsibility of making sure that that data is secure, it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, the data is high quality. I hope that answers the question. And again, I would like to invite my fellow panelists to answer or add to it. They are much more experienced. They've seen this over and over. So please feel free to add to it.
Jay, only one point here. You mentioned about data stewardship. How it is different from chief data officer, the role of chief data officer. Because if I'm CEO of a bank, I would like to see people being designated as chief data officer. So
yes, great question. Yes, so when you talk about being a chief data officer, right? We cannot add the level of ownership to the chief data officer for the whole shebang, so to speak, right? You have data coming from your system of originations, SORs, data that's been cleansed, processed, confirmed. We need that granular data. We need people who understand the data well enough to be accountable, right? The chief data officer is just, in principle, well, if there is a supreme being, they can provide all the details, right? But in practicality, it's just not possible, right? You need people who are working side by side that data, maybe for months and years, and who has, have full understanding of that data to be the stewards.
Great. One follow-up thing to that, we have got institutions which have multiple entities. Okay. So in which case, you mentioned about centralized data storage and governance. So what are the good governing principles banks should follow where, say, bank is having multiple entities or in multiple countries, which is quite common. Today, banks are expanding across regions, geographies, across various lines of business. So the complexity multiplies. What should be their approach?
Again, a very complex question, but definitely the one that we all need to think about and answer. The way I would approach this is those principles are still what will guide you, right? Because when we talk about, say, those PII definitions, right? Now, in US, well, my phone number may not be, I'm just making this up, by the way, my phone number may not be a confidential information. But if I move to a different country, right? Well, your phone number may be classified as a PII information, right? So the underlying details on those classifications, the regulations will change. However, I'm a strong believer in those principles. I think they will still stand and provide the right mindset to build that framework.
Okay, please go ahead. There are some more questions.
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm skipping any. Okay, so I see a question from Dennis. Which of the 8 pillars forms the key mandates for any data analysis teams? Okay, I'll check with you, Mr. Iyer, if you have any thoughts on this while I'm still trying to absorb kind of the essence of this question.
Sorry.
Jay, in the meantime, you can take this question.
Yeah, there is a question from Erika.
There's a question from Ashok Nag. Do you think the data governance strategy would be on the same line for unstructured data and structured data? That's the question.
That is a great question, right? And there are a lot of blurry lines. And the reason is the regulators haven't really thought about unstructured data. They either don't understand what that means in its full detail. For example, right? You're looking at your social media feeds, right? Your tweets, or even your Slack chats, your emails. All of that data currently, especially the banks, they're not getting rid of it, right? They're dumping it into a big data somewhere. However, now they want to run some analytics. They want to run artificial intelligence, machine learning type of activities onto it. But there are rules that say, well, you cannot use a customer's private information without their explicit consent for running your analytics. However, this is unstructured data, right? We don't know what's in there, right? Even for us to look into it, we have to open it up and start using it. So there are some blurred lines. However, regulators are catching up, right? Things like emails, as I mentioned, some other PI information. You want to be very careful before you start deploying your machine learning algorithms onto it. So yeah, I think we are still kind of evolving. Such a great question. I may sound like a broken record, but I think the principles will still apply, right? Whether it's structured data, unstructured data, or semi-structured data. Great question. Thank you.
There's an interesting question from Erika. Are there any framework that you can recommend for achieving wholesome data governance?
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit, right? There is no, again, we are talking about framework, right? So the framework has to be built, right? Can you get something off the shelf? Well, the answer is yes or no. Yes and no, right? So there are technology companies who has multitude of products will touch multiple things that we care about in our data governance journey, right? So they may offer a seamlessly integrated way of doing your metadata management, cataloging that information out, doing the access control, all singular platform. So it might kind of ease your implementation time on a practical level. However, if you are an organization, you are still in charge. You have to write the rules of engagement for this game, right? And I don't want to call out those companies or recommend any company versus another on this forum. But if you are interested, please send us an email, and we can give you a list of companies based on what matters to you and what we think might be a good candidate for you to evaluate. Appreciate the question. Thank you.
Then the next question is on which of the 8 pillars forms the key mandates for any data analysis teams?
Yeah, I would ask the questionnaire to maybe expand on it a little bit. I'm not fully catching the essence of that question.
Dennis,
okay,
yeah, I would like to. Dennis, you have any additional ideas on that?
Yes, we spoke about the 8 pillars of the data governance. So I'm just trying to find out which of these pillars would form the mandate for any data analysis team.
I see, I see, I see. Okay, okay. Sorry about that. It's still kind of early morning on my coffee cup. So yeah, we talked about data warehousing and BI, right? Well, that's one pillar where you need a strong data analysis team. Another one, that metadata management, right? Identifying how do you create that data profile. That again, you need a strong data analysis team. If you can go back to that slide, I think it's slide number 7 or 8.
Slide number 10, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, you
Next.
were right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if you look at this, right, well, to a degree, right, data quality also. I think master and reference data. Definitely, you need a good set of data analysts, business analysts to kind of support this operation. Data security, again, to an extent, and the reason is, based on that particular classification that came from data security, you may need data analysis to kind of go and find out and make a list or the mapping of those particular data elements. So yeah, to answer your question, I think it's easier to answer where won't it be applied, right? Because it's pretty much across the board, right? Because we are dealing with data. Data is the currency that we are operating under. So we need folks throughout who are well versed in data. We call them data analysts, right? Great question, Dennis. Thank you.
We have one more question from Dayo. Can someone institute a legal suit across the border for violation of data protection?
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
Okay.
So this has been happening, right? So GDPR, for example, it's not a US regulation, right? It's coming from across the ocean. However, a lot of the US companies are doing business. They have consumers in UK, right, in the other part of the world. And those companies who are doing business in Britain are also subject to GDPR, right? In some of these data breaches, many companies ended up defending themselves from those violation and the actions suits from abroad. So absolutely, this is applicable, right? And if you think about it, right, many companies are coming, I should say, many countries are kind of coming up with their own version of GDPR, right? I think India has something under the that's going to come soon, but they will have one or another version of how they classify private or confidential data for their constituents, right? And if, as an entity, whether you be an US entity or Japanese entity or African entity, if you're doing business in that particular country, you are subject to those regulations. So absolutely, this is happening over and over. Okay, thank you. Great question.
Any other questions? Feel free to raise. Okay, so if there are no other questions, thanks a lot, Jay, for this wonderful session. Very useful. I'm sure, all the participants here would be greatly benefited by the ideas and thoughts you shared. And definitely we look forward to some more sessions from you in this related area. Thanks and have a wonderful day. And thanks to all the participants once again. We look forward to see you again on Thursday, 9 September, same time. Thanks a lot.